today comes after extensive work, and perhaps it's important to give a brief history in that first, as we approach the evolution of public sentiments with respect to the use and abuse of marijuana, the government sought in a very careful manner to involve the public in the conversation and in the debate, and to ensure that this was done in an appropriate manner and independently, we established the Marijuana Commission, which was headed by our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Hazel Laws. That committee went through the length and breadth of the country, including the island of Nevis and St. Kitts, and engaged members of the public after doing extensive research on the topic of marijuana. After some 17 months, the committee then submitted a report for consideration by the Cabinet, and it made a number of recommendations as to the way forward. That committee found that there were mixed views in the society regarding the use of marijuana. However, having regard to matters of science and health, the committee was unanimous in its recommendation that the government ought to pursue the decriminalization of marijuana for purposes of health. And in that regard, the committee further went on to recommend that the government approach this topic in a phased way, having regard to the state of flux that it was in the international community with respect to this matter. There's a state of flux because marijuana internationally is treated as a dangerous drug by the United Nations system, and that is still the case. However, the Commission was mindful of several benefits that have been scientifically proven to have come and accrue to persons who have used marijuana in certain circumstances. The committee indicated that a long period of public education would be required before we'll be ready to move full scale into issues related to the use and abuse and other issues related to marijuana. It recommended that there should be a follow-up committee to do some work and to further elucidate some of the matters it had raised itself. In this regard, and consistent with the recommendation that there be further discussions and engagement with respect to the matter, the Cabinet set up a marijuana implementation core committee headed by Dr. Wycliffe Baird to help us further with respect to this matter. Today, we have come to make further progress by passing the Cannabis Bill 2020, thereby creating the legal framework for transactions relating to the medicinal marijuana and its use, and matters pertaining thereto. Mr. Speaker, this regulatory framework, which we seek the support of the Parliament today, is to ensure that medicinal cannabis is licensed, tracked, and traced in St. Kitts and Nevis. That bill was read at first meeting of the National Assembly in May 2019. Today, you will recall that we brought an updated version of this bill. The bill reflects the comments and recommendations that have emanated from a very extensive consultation process. In the OECS, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Antigua and Barbuda have enacted legislation to decriminalize the possession of small amounts and license the use of medicinal marijuana. There is also currently work underway in relation to this matter in St. Lucia, and of course it is a matter of active consideration before the Parliament in Trinidad and Tobago. We in St. Kitts and Nevis have had the added impetus from the interpretive support of a judgment of the High Court in the Ras Sankofa Maccabee versus the Commissioner of Police and the Attorney General case. And we have responded, of course, in this very Parliament through amendments to what, in short form, is described as the Drugs Act. Mr. Speaker, cannabis has been used for medicinal properties, for its medicinal properties by various peoples and culture. And there have been a very widely appreciated documentary by Dr. Sanjay Gupta showing the tremendous value of the drug for certain medical conditions. In our own, and CNN, in our own report of the commission, our own local commission, Dr. Hazel's report reflected the global consensus in the scientific community that there can be beneficial impact for people in certain medical conditions. And generally it is that its use in ways prescribed by doctors can assist persons who are suffering pain, and indeed terrible pain. Pain associated with cancer, for example, severe intractable epilepsy, glaucoma, and other conditions. Those who saw Dr. Gupta's documentary, I am sure, Mr. Speaker, would recall the significant implications for some of the families with children who responded well to treatment based on the cannabis. In certain cases, the use in children with epilepsy and seizure disorders has been found to be quite effective without the deleterious side effects. This bill is to ensure that patients and others who use the cannabis are protected and the use of the drug is controlled, tracked, and traced in the Federation. Under this regulatory framework, the right to access this alternative medicine is protected and regulated. Mr. Speaker, the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes is consistent with or allowed under various international agreements that we have signed, and we remain committed to fully complying with our international obligations under these arrangements. In other words, Mr. Speaker, this bill will not allow or facilitate drug trafficking or illegal use of cannabis, but would rather decriminalize the proper use of medicinal cannabis for various purposes. The bill is not a license to break the law, nor does it allow for the abuse of marijuana. We would also want to remind persons that in the changes with regard to the Drugs Act, we allow for the use of small quantities in private spaces. In other words, it was never the intention of the law to allow persons to use this in public places, and particularly in a manner that infringe upon the right of other persons to the peaceful enjoyment of public spaces. And therefore, we caution those that the use as provided under the law is with respect to private spaces. Mr. Speaker, this bill provides for a strict regulatory system to be managed and implemented by a cannabis authority. In that regard, it is anticipated that this bill will provide a proper foundation upon which the regulatory framework of licensing, tracking, cultivating, supplying, manufacturing, religious and other use and other details can be effectively managed. In sum, Mr. Speaker, we are now creating a framework to this bit of legislation and the necessary regulations which will come thereafter, in which we could participate in a legal way in this particular area. It is a new and evolving industry. And in fact, we have learned that in some of the jurisdictions, for example, Antigua and Barbuda, which had moved with respect to this particular bit of legislation, it had become necessary for them to go back to the Parliament time thereafter to make further amendments to the law to ensure that they were not in breach of international agreements, and also to take advantage of new learning in this particular arena. This bill then is not perfect, and we are prepared as new knowledge unfolds, as we get the benefit of the experience of the application of the law in other jurisdictions, to come back to Parliament to ensure that we have the best functioning legislation to allow the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, first and foremost, to benefit from this new industry which we are about to establish. Mr. Speaker, I want to say, in all that we do, we will put what is best for our people and our country first. And as we begin the build-out of this particular new area of engagement, we would want to ensure pride of place to local people in St. Kitts and Nevis. Like most industries, we will benefit, of course, from the expertise of persons living here and living abroad. Like most industries, we will benefit from investment from persons who have resources, and the resources will not always be financial. There will be technical, intellectual, and other resources that they can bring to help us. We will welcome these, but always we will ensure that the local people, our brethren of the Rastafarian community, they are given pride of place in this new industry. Mr. Speaker, without much more ado, with respect to the cannabis bill, I want to wish this bill, whose object is to provide for the establishment of the Medicinal Cannabis Authority to regulate, monitor, and control the cultivation, the supply, the possession, the production, and use of medicinal cannabis, and for related matters, safe passage. You should note, Mr. Speaker, that we start all the way back from cultivation. As we enter into this new industry, everything has to be monitored to ensure compliance with international expectations with regard to safety and control with respect to this particular area of engagement. So it says that the principal purpose of the authority will be to regulate, monitor, and control the cultivation, the supply, the possession, the production, and use of cannabis in matters to do with health. I pause at this moment, Mr. Speaker, and to, again, hope that we will have full support for this important piece of legislation. May I please you, Mr. Speaker.